Chicago night poured down sleet and rain as if it meant to chase every lost soul off the streets. Outside Obsidian, the most exclusive restaurant in West Loop, warm yellow light spilled onto the frozen sidewalk like a cruel joke aimed at anyone who couldn't afford to step through those glass doors. The security guard in a black suit was about to shoo the child away when he stopped. In the corner of the wall, a few steps from the entrance, a little girl stood huddled. She couldn't have been more than 6. A thin dress with a torn shoulder clung to a frame so gaunt her ribs showed through. No coat, barefoot on the snow, dirty blonde hair, unevenly cut, matted against a pale forehead. On her left cheek, near her eye, was a bruise still fresh. In her tiny hands, purple from the cold, she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit. Its ear was torn, its stuffing yellowed with age, as if it were the only thing she had left in the world. Large blue eyes, deep and ancient, looked up at the security guard. Not with fear, only with the resignation of a child who had grown too used to being turned away. The guard raised his hand to wave her off, but the little girl didn't ask for money, didn't ask for food, didn't cry or beg. She only asked one question, her voice a whisper, trembling from the cold. "Mister, do you know anyone who wants a child?" The guard blinked, his hand froze in midair. The little girl lowered her head, her voice growing smaller, as if speaking to herself. "I promise I'll be good. I know how to wash dishes. I know how to mop floors. I don't eat much. I just need a place where no one hits me." Those words didn't sound rehearsed. They were clumsy, broken like a child, trying to explain her own worth through the chores she could do, as if she had grown used to asking permission to exist. Just then, a sleek black Maybach glided to the curb and stopped. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, long black overcoat, dark hair graying at the temples, wet with sleet. Steel gray eyes swept the sidewalk with the automatic habit of someone used to controlling everything within his sight. Dominic Blackwood, owner of Obsidian, ruler of half of Chicago's underworld, and things that no one dared to mention. They called him the Black King. He was about to walk straight inside, but then his eyes caught the little girl. She stared back, unblinking, unflinching, the stuffed rabbit clutched tight, her purple lips trembling, rain or tears streaming down her cheek, running over the bruise. Dominic stopped. The man that Chicago's underworld feared. The man whose single nod could decide the fate of others. The man who had never forgiven anyone who betrayed him. Stood frozen before a 6-year-old girl standing barefoot in the snow. And then, he did something no one expected. He slowly crouched down, one knee touched the frozen pavement, until his steel gray eyes were level with the child's clear blue ones. "What's your name, little one?" His voice softened without meaning to, as if someone had flipped a switch and silenced the predator inside him. The little girl didn't answer immediately. She looked at him, looked for a long time with eyes far too old for her age. The eyes of a child who had learned to read adults to survive. Then she tilted her head. "Emma," she answered, her voice a whisper. "But no one ever wants to know my name." Dominic said nothing. Something flickered in his eyes, so fast that even Marcus standing behind him didn't have time to notice. Perhaps it was rage. Perhaps it was old pain. Perhaps it was the shadow of another little girl, the one he had lost 20 years ago, at exactly this age. "I want to know," he said, his voice rough. Emma blinked, as if that was the strangest thing she had ever heard. "Why?" Dominic didn't answer. He simply removed his black overcoat, a coat worth more than most people's yearly rent, and draped it over the girl's bony shoulders. Emma flinched, the reflex of a child used to being hit when someone raised a hand toward her. Dominic paused, didn't push, didn't rush. He simply let the coat rest on her shoulders, then stood. He turned to Marcus, his most trusted man, who had followed him for 20 years. His voice returned to its usual chill, but underneath was something else. Something Marcus had never heard in 20 years. "Bring her inside. Call the doctor. Now." Marcus nodded, didn't ask. In 20 years of following Dominic Blackwood, he had never seen his boss kneel before anyone, never seen him give his coat to anyone, never seen him look at anyone with those eyes. Tonight, everything had changed, because of a 6-year-old girl, barefoot in the snow, clutching a torn stuffed rabbit, asking a question no child should ever have to ask. "Do you know anyone who wants a child?" Marcus held the glass door open. The warmth hit Emma like a wall so different from the freezing night outside that for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. She stood at the threshold, drowning in Dominic's oversized coat, the hem dragging on the ground like a black cape. The stuffed rabbit peeked out from where she clutched it against her chest. Her bare feet, red and raw from the snow, hovered just above the polished marble floor. She didn't step inside. Marcus glanced down at her. It's okay, come in. Emma shook her head slowly. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I'll make the floor dirty. Marcus blinked. He had seen a lot of things in his 48 years, things that would keep most men awake for the rest of their lives. But something about those words, spoken so quietly, so matter-of-factly, made his chest tighten in a way he didn't expect. The floor can be cleaned, he said, keeping his voice low and gentle. Come inside, you'll freeze out there. Emma hesitated. Then, slowly, carefully, she stepped onto the marble, and she walked on her tiptoes. Each step was placed with deliberate precision, soft, silent, as if she had learned long ago that making noise meant punishment, as if her very existence was something she needed to apologize for. The restaurant fell silent. Obsidian on a Friday night was never quiet. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over white linen tables. Soft jazz hummed through hidden speakers. The air smelled of truffle oil, aged wine, and money, the kind of money that didn't need to announce itself. But now, every head turned. Waiters paused mid-stride. A sommelier froze with a bottle half raised. Guests in designer suits and silk dresses stared openly at the strange procession. A giant of a man in a black suit, leading a skeletal child wrapped in an overcoat worth more than some cars, leaving wet footprints on the pristine floor. Whispers rippled through the room, like wind through dead leaves. What is that? Is that a homeless child? Why is she here? Did Marcus just bring a street kid into Obsidian? Emma heard them. Her shoulders hunched. Her head dropped lower. She made herself smaller, as if trying to disappear into the coat. But she kept walking, one silent step after another. Sarah Mitchell intercepted them halfway across the dining room. The floor manager was a tall woman in her early 40s, sharp eyes, sharper tongue, gray-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun. She had worked at Obsidian for 7 years and trusted no one who hadn't earned it. This child had earned nothing. Marcus. Sarah's voice was clipped, professional, but her eyes were fixed on Emma with barely concealed disapproval. What exactly is going on? We have a full house tonight. VIP guests in the private room. You can't just step aside, Sarah. The voice came from behind them. Dominic Blackwood walked through the door, sleet still clinging to his dark hair, his white shirt damp against his shoulders. Without his coat, he looked somehow more dangerous, like a blade unsheathed. Sarah turned to face him, her mouth open to protest. Dominic looked at her. Just looked. One glance, cold, flat. The kind of look that had made grown men reconsider their life choices. Sarah's mouth closed. She stepped aside without another word. Dominic walked past her without acknowledgement. His eyes found Emma small, shivering, drowning in his coat, and something in his jaw tightened. This way, he said quietly. Not to Marcus. To her. Emma looked up at him, those large blue eyes, filled with confusion and exhaustion, and something that might have been the faintest flicker of hope. She followed. They walked through the kitchen corridor, past stainless steel counters and startled cooks, past the storage rooms and the staff quarters, until they reached a small private room at the back of the building. Dominic opened the door and gestured inside. Wait here. Someone will bring you food and water. Emma stepped into the room, then she turned back, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry for making your floor dirty. Dominic went still. For a long moment, he said nothing, just looked at the child who was apologizing for existing, for taking up space, for leaving footprints on a floor that could be cleaned in seconds. Don't apologize, he said finally. His voice was rough. Not for that. Not ever. He closed the door gently behind her. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered. Dominic, it's nearly midnight. What, Helen? His voice was calm, controlled, but underneath was something else. Something that made Dr. Helen Park sit up straighter on the other end of the line. Come to Obsidian. Now. A pause. What happened? Dominic looked at the closed door. Behind it, a 6-year-old girl was probably curled up in a corner, clutching a stuffed rabbit, wondering if she would be thrown back into the snow. There's a child, he said quietly. She needs to be examined. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm on my way. The line went dead. Dominic stood in the corridor, staring at nothing. In 20 years of building his empire, he had never brought anyone into Obsidian who didn't belong to his world. Never let anyone see behind the curtain. Never allowed weakness, his or anyone else's, to exist within these walls. Tonight, he had carried a half-frozen child through his front door, and he didn't know why. All he knew was that when he looked into those eyes, those ancient, exhausted, hopeless eyes, he saw someone else. Someone he had lost a long time ago. Someone he had failed to save. Not this time, a voice whispered in the back of his mind. Not again. Dr. Helen Park arrived 23 minutes after the call. She was a small woman in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. She had been Dominic's personal physician for 15 years, had stitched bullet wounds, set broken bones, extracted shrapnel, and never once asked how those injuries occurred. Tonight, she asked no questions either. Marcus led her to the back room and opened the door. Dr. Park stepped inside and stopped. The room was warm, well lit, furnished with a comfortable sofa and soft chairs. A plate of food sat untouched on the small table, next to a glass of water that hadn't been sipped. And in the far corner, pressed into the space where two walls met, a little girl sat curled into herself. Emma had made herself as small as possible, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around them, face half hidden behind the stuffed rabbit. Dominic's coat was still draped over her shoulders like a shield. Her eyes were open, watching, tracking every movement in the room with the hypervigilance of a hunted animal. Dr. Park set down her medical bag and approached slowly. "Hello there," she said, keeping her voice soft. "My name is Helen. I'm a doctor. I'm here to help you." Emma pressed harder into the corner. Dr. Park took another step forward. Emma flinched a full-body recoil, as if expecting a blow. The doctor froze. "It's all right," she said gently. "I won't hurt you. I just need to check if you're okay." She reached out a hand. Emma scrambled backward, a small whimper escaping her throat. Her eyes went wide, wild, fixed on the approaching hand as if it were a weapon. "No, please, I'll be good. I'll be quiet. Please don't. Stop." Dominic's voice cut through the room. He had been standing in the doorway, watching. Now he stepped inside. His footsteps slow and deliberate. Dr. Park moved aside. Dominic walked to the corner where Emma was pressed against the wall, trembling like a leaf in a storm. He didn't reach for her, didn't crowd her. He simply lowered himself to the floor, his back against the adjacent wall, and sat down, at her level, within reach, but not touching. "Emma." His voice was quiet, calm, the same voice he had used outside in the snow. The little girl's eyes found his. "The doctor needs to look at you," Dominic said, "to make sure you're not hurt. She won't do anything you don't want, I promise." Emma's breathing was still rapid, shallow, but something in her gaze shifted a tiny crack in the wall of terror. "Will you stay?" she whispered. Dominic nodded. "I'll stay." Slowly, carefully, he extended his hand, palm up, open, unthreatening, an offering, a choice. Emma stared at that hand for a long moment. Then, with the hesitation of a creature that had been hurt too many times, she reached out. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his, and she held on. Dr. Park approached again, this time with Emma's permission. The examination was slow, gentle, methodical. Every time Emma tensed, Dominic's hand remained steady in hers, an anchor in the storm. But as the examination progressed, Dr. Park's face changed. The professional mask slipped, her movements became slower. Her jaw tightened. When she lifted Emma's shirt to check her back, her hands trembled just slightly, just for a moment. 15 minutes later, she stepped into the corridor where Dominic waited. Her face was pale, her voice was flat, the clinical monotone she used when the news was bad. "Severe malnutrition," she began. "Stage 3. Based on her condition, she hasn't eaten properly in weeks, possibly longer. Her stomach has shrunk significantly." Dominic said nothing. He simply listened. 2 broken ribs on the left side. They were never set properly, never treated. They've healed at wrong angles. She's probably been in constant pain for months. Still nothing. But his hands slowly curled into fists at his sides. 7 circular burn scars on her arms and thighs. Cigarette burns, deliberate, evenly spaced. At least 15 lash marks on her back. Different stages of healing, which means they happened over time. 2 fingernails on her left hand were ripped out. They haven't fully grown back. Dr. Park paused. Her clinical tone wavered. And first-degree frostbite on both feet. She's been walking barefoot in the snow for hours, maybe longer. The corridor went silent. Marcus, standing 3 feet away, watched his boss carefully. Dominic's expression hadn't changed. His posture hadn't shifted. But Marcus had worked for this man for 20 years. He saw what others would miss. The slight clench of the jaw, the almost imperceptible tightening of the shoulders. The way Dominic's eyes had gone from cold to something far more dangerous. "This isn't abuse, Dominic." Dr. Park's voice dropped lower. "This is systematic torture. Someone did this to her deliberately, repeatedly, over a long period of time. Dominic turned and walked back into the room. Emma was still in the corner, clutching her rabbit, watching the door. When she saw him, something in her small body relaxed just a fraction. He crouched down in front of her, eye level, the same way he had done outside in the snow. "Emma." His voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. "Who did this to you?" The little girl looked at him with those ancient, exhausted eyes, and when she spoke, her voice held no anger, no accusation, only the quiet acceptance of a child who had been taught that pain was normal. "I was bad," she whispered, "so I was punished." Something cracked behind Dominic's eyes, not visibly, not loudly, just a quiet fracture like ice finally giving way after holding too long. He didn't ask another question. He simply sat down beside her, his back against the wall, close enough that she could feel his presence but not so close that she would feel trapped. And he stayed, because somewhere, buried deep beneath 20 years of blood and power and cold ruthlessness, a 16-year-old boy remembered another little girl. A girl he couldn't save. A girl whose face he saw every time he looked at Emma. Not this time, he thought again. Whatever it takes. Not this time. The room was beautiful. Emma stood in the doorway, clutching Rosie against her chest, and stared. A real bed, not a mattress on the floor, not a pile of blankets in a basement corner, but a real bed with white sheets and fluffy pillows, and a soft comforter that looked like a cloud, a nightstand with a small lamp that cast warm golden light, a window with curtains, actual curtains, not cardboard taped over broken glass, a thick carpet that looked softer than anything she had ever touched. Sarah Mitchell had brought her here after Dr. Park finished bandaging her feet. The woman's face was stiff, unreadable, but her voice had been almost gentle when she said, "This is your room. For tonight. For tonight." Emma understood those words. She had heard them before at the shelter that kicked her out after 3 days. At the church that only let her sleep in the basement when it rained. Nothing was ever permanent. Not for her. Sarah left. The door clicked shut. Emma didn't move. She stood there for a long time, just looking at the bed. It was so big, so clean, so white. She couldn't sleep there. What if she made it dirty? What if she had a nightmare and wet the sheets? What if she messed up the pillows and someone got angry? Slowly, carefully, Emma walked to the far corner of the room, the corner farthest from the door, where she could see anyone who entered. She sat down on the carpet, pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped Dominic's coat, which she was still wearing, tighter around her small frame. This was better, safer. Corners were good. In corners, no one could sneak up behind you. On the nightstand, someone had left a tray of food, a sandwich, an apple, a glass of milk, a small piece of chocolate cake. Emma's stomach cramped with hunger, but she didn't touch it, not yet. First, she needed to save some, just in case. She crept over to the tray, moving silently on bandaged feet. With practiced hands, she pulled apart the sandwich, took out 2 slices of bread, and hid them under the pillow on the bed. If they kicked her out tomorrow, at least she would have something to eat. The apple went into the pocket of the coat. It was heavy, but the pocket was deep. No one would notice. Only then did she allow herself to eat small bites, chewing slowly, making it last. Her shrunken stomach couldn't handle much anyway. Too much food too fast made her sick. She had learned that the hard way. When she finished half the sandwich, she stopped, wrapped the rest in a napkin, hid it in the other pocket. Then she went back to her corner. She pulled Rosie out from under the coat and held the rabbit close to her face. The worn fabric smelled like rain and cold and something faintly like home, though Emma couldn't quite remember what home used to smell like. "Rosie," she whispered, so quiet that even the walls couldn't hear. "Do you think they'll let us stay?" The rabbit said nothing, but Emma could imagine its answer. "I know. Probably not." She stroked the torn ear, the yellowed stuffing peeking through. "But maybe if I'm really, really good, if I don't make any noise, don't eat too much, don't make anyone angry." Her voice cracked. "I tried to be good, Rosie. I really did. Why does everyone still send me away?" No answer came. Emma pressed her face into the rabbit's soft body and closed her eyes. But she didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every sound made her jolt: the creak of the building settling, the distant hum of the kitchen below, footsteps passing in the corridor. She had to stay awake, had to watch the door, had to be ready, just in case. It was past midnight when Dominic walked down the corridor. He had spent hours in his office, staring at reports he couldn't read, thinking about things he couldn't fix. Sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those scars, those burns, those ancient eyes in a 6-year-old's face. He passed Emma's door, and stopped. A thin line of golden light glowed beneath the door. The lamp was still on. Dominic hesitated. Then, slowly, quietly, he leaned closer. Through the narrow gap between the door and the frame, he could see inside. Emma was not in the bed. She was curled in the far corner of the room, wrapped in his coat, clutching her rabbit, eyes wide open, watching the door, waiting, the way a wild animal waits for the next predator to come. Something twisted in Dominic's chest, sharp, painful, unfamiliar. He raised his hand to knock, to go inside, to tell her she was safe, that no one would hurt her, that she didn't have to keep watch anymore. But he didn't, because he knew with the instinct of someone who had survived his own share of darkness that words meant nothing. Not yet, not to a child who had learned that every promise was a lie. Trust couldn't be told, it had to be shown, slowly, patiently, over time. So, Dominic lowered his hand, and he stood there, outside the door, for a very long time, just watching over her, the way he wished someone had watched over Lily 20 years ago. Then, finally, he turned and walked away. But he didn't go far. He spent the rest of the night in the chair at the end of the corridor, close enough to hear if she screamed, far enough not to frighten her, and when the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, he was still there, waiting. 5 in the morning. The kitchen of Obsidian was dark and silent, waiting for the day to begin. Chef Antonio Rossi arrived early, as he always did. 58 years old, broad as a barrel, with salt and pepper hair and hands that had kneaded 1,000,000 pounds of dough. He had worked in kitchens since he was 14, first in Naples, then Rome, then New York, and finally here, in Chicago, where Dominic Blackwood had offered him more money than any restaurant in the city. Antonio didn't care about the money, he cared about the food. And this kitchen with its gleaming steel counters and imported Italian stoves was his kingdom. He flipped on the lights, and froze. A small figure crouched beside the trash bin in the corner. Tiny hands were digging through the garbage, pulling out bread crusts, bits of discarded pastry, scraps of food that hadn't been thrown away long enough to go bad. Emma, still wearing Dominic's oversized coat, still clutching that worn stuffed rabbit under one arm. Her bandaged feet were bare against the cold tile floor. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess around her pale face. She was eating garbage, and she was doing it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many, many times before. For a moment, Antonio didn't move, didn't speak. He had seen hungry people before, in Naples, after the war, when food was scarce, and children fought over scraps in the streets. He had been one of those children once, a lifetime ago. He recognized the look in Emma's eyes when she finally noticed him, the terror of being caught, the desperate calculation of whether to run or fight, the instinctive curl of her body around the precious scraps she had gathered. Antonio did not yell, did not scold, did not make any sudden moves. He simply walked to the industrial refrigerator, pulled out a container, and set it on the counter. Then he took a pot, filled it with water, and placed it on the stove. Emma watched him, frozen, a piece of stale bread clutched in her fist. Antonio worked in silence for a few minutes, heating olive oil, adding garlic, stirring pasta into the boiling water, the kitchen filled with the smell of something warm, something real, something that didn't come from a trash can. When the pasta was done al dente, the way his grandmother had taught him, he plated it with a simple tomato sauce, a sprinkle of parmesan, a drizzle of olive oil. He set the plate on a small prep table near Emma, placed a fork beside it. Then he sat down on an overturned crate, keeping a respectful distance. In Italy, he said, his accent thick even after 20 years in America. We do not eat from the garbage. Emma didn't move. Her eyes darted between Antonio and the plate, suspicious, calculating. Is not poison, Antonio added, a hint of a smile in his voice. I make this with my own hands. I eat the same thing every morning. See? He took another fork, twirled some pasta from the plate, and ate it. Good, yes. My grandmother's recipe. She would rise from her grave and hit me with a wooden spoon if I let a child eat trash in my kitchen. Slowly. Very slowly. Emma crept forward. She sniffed the plate, looked at Antonio, looked at the pasta. Then she picked up the fork with trembling fingers and took the tiniest bite. Her eyes went wide. It was warm. It was soft. It tasted like something from a dream she couldn't quite remember, a dream of kitchens and laughter and someone who loved her. She took another bite, and another, and another. Antonio watched her eat, his heart aching in ways he hadn't felt in years. You know, he said softly, I have a granddaughter, Isabella. She is 6 years old, same as you. She lives in Sicily, with her mother. Emma paused, a strand of pasta hanging from her lips. I have not seen her in 3 years. Antonio's voice grew quieter. Too much work. Always too much work. I tell myself, next year I will visit. But next year never comes. He looked at Emma, at her thin face, her cautious eyes, the way she curled protectively around her food, as if someone might snatch it away. She has curly dark hair. My Isabella. And a laugh like little bells. I miss her very much. Emma swallowed. Why don't you go see her? The question was so simple, so innocent, and it cut Antonio deeper than any knife in his kitchen. I don't know, he admitted. Sometimes grown-ups are stupid. We forget what matters. Emma considered this, then she nodded solemnly, as if she understood. When the plate was empty, Antonio took it away and returned with something else. A small pizza, fresh from the oven, shaped like a rabbit. He had used olives for eyes, a cherry tomato for a nose, and carefully arranged pepperoni to form long ears. For you, he said, presenting it with a dramatic flourish. Emma stared at the rabbit pizza. Her eyes grew bright. Wet. But she didn't eat it. Instead, she looked up at Antonio, with an expression that broke something inside him. Can I keep it? She whispered. Just to remember? In case I have to leave and I forget what it looks like. Antonio felt his throat tighten. He had to look away for a moment, pretending to check something on the stove, so the child wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. You eat this one, he said, his voice rough. And tomorrow, I make another. And the day after, another. Every day, I make you a new one. So you never have to remember, because you will always have more. Emma blinked, as if the concept of always was something she couldn't quite grasp, but she picked up the pizza, and she ate it, slowly, savoring each bite, as if it were the most precious thing she had ever tasted. When she finished, she looked at Antonio with those ancient, exhausted eyes, and something new flickered in them, something that hadn't been there before. Thank you, she said quietly. Uncle Tony. The name slipped out before she could stop it. Antonio's heart cracked wide open. No one had called him that since Isabella was a baby. No one had looked at him with that mixture of hope and fear and desperate need. He cleared his throat, blinked rapidly, turned back to his stove. You are welcome, little one, he said gruffly. Now I need someone to taste my soup. Very important job. You think you can help? Emma nodded, clutching Rosie tighter. And for the first time since she had arrived at Obsidian, something that might have been a smile touched the corners of her lips. Midnight. Obsidian slept beneath a blanket of silence. The kitchen was dark, the dining room empty, the corridors still. Only the soft hum of the heating system broke the quiet. Dominic Blackwood did not sleep. He stood at the end of the third-floor hallway, in front of a door that hadn't been opened in years. A simple wooden door, unremarkable in every way except for the lock, heavy-duty steel, the kind used for safes and vaults, the kind meant to keep something precious inside, or to keep memories from escaping. He pulled a key from his pocket. The metal was warm from being held too long, turned over and over in restless fingers. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Then he unlocked the door. The room exhaled dust and stillness. Dominic stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His hand found the light switch and the past flooded back. Toys, everywhere, toys. A dollhouse in the corner, 3 stories tall, with tiny furniture still arranged in perfect little rooms. Stuffed animals lined the shelves, bears and rabbits, and a unicorn with a purple mane. Picture books stacked on a small white desk, their spines cracked from being read 100 times. Goodnight Moon, the Velveteen Rabbit, Where the Wild Things Are, a child's bedroom, frozen in time. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but beneath the dust, everything was perfect, preserved. The bed was made, the pillows fluffed, the pink blanket folded at the foot, as if someone might come back at any moment. As if someone had been waiting for 20 years. Dominic walked to the small desk and picked up a photograph in a silver frame. A little girl smiled up at him. Blonde hair, messy with curls, blue eyes, bright as summer sky. A gap-toothed grin, mischievous and full of life. She was holding a stuffed rabbit white, with long floppy ears, and laughing at whoever was behind the camera. Lily, his sister, his responsibility, his greatest failure. The photograph trembled in his hands. 20 years ago. Dominic was 16, tall for his age, already showing signs of the man he would become. Strong jaw, sharp eyes, shoulders that were beginning to broaden, but still a boy. Still young enough to believe the world made sense. Lily was 6. She walked beside him on the way home from school, chattering about her day. Her small hand tucked trustingly in his. She had made a drawing in art class, a picture of their family, stick figures with big heads and bigger smiles. She wanted to show their mother. "Dom, do you think Mama will put it on the fridge?" "Of course she will. Bug. Promise, promise." The black van came out of nowhere. It pulled up beside them, tires screeching. The side door slid open. Hands reached out large, rough, grabbing. Lily screamed. Dominic." He lunged for her, caught her arm, pulled with everything he had, but he was 16. And they were grown men. And there were too many of them. Something hard hit the back of his head. The world exploded into white, then red, then nothing. The last thing he heard was his sister's voice, screaming his name. "Dom, help, Dominic, please." Then silence. He woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. His mother was there, her face hollow, her eyes dead. She didn't look at him, couldn't look at him. Lily was gone. No ransom note, no demands, no trace. The police searched for months, then weeks, then not at all. She was never found. His parents divorced within the year. His father disappeared into alcohol. His mother swallowed a bottle of pills on the anniversary of Lily's disappearance. And Dominic buried everything. Every memory, every feeling, every piece of the boy who had failed to save his sister. He built walls so high and so thick that nothing could get through. He built an empire. He became the Black King, and he swore on his sister's memory, on his mother's grave, on everything he had lost that he would never be powerless again. The photograph stared up at him. Blue eyes, blonde hair, 6 years old. Just like Emma, Dominic had noticed it the moment he saw her in the snow. The resemblance was uncanny, the same delicate features, the same wispy hair, the same eyes that were too old for such a young face. But Emma's eyes held something Lily's never had. Pain, fear, the hollow resignation of a child who had given up on being saved. Lily had always believed her big brother would protect her, right up until the moment he couldn't. Emma believed in nothing, expected nothing, hoped for nothing, and somehow, that was worse. Dominic set the photograph down on the desk. His fingers lingered on the silver frame, tracing the curve of his sister's smile. "I couldn't save you," he whispered to the empty room. "I've lived with that for 20 years. Every day, every night, I see your face when I close my eyes. I hear you screaming my name." His voice cracked, just barely, just enough. "But she's here now. This little girl who appeared out of the snow, asking if anyone wanted her." He straightened, his jaw tightened, his eyes hardened into steel. "I don't know why she found me. I don't know what it means, but I know this." He turned toward the door. "This time, I won't lose her." He walked out of the room and locked the door behind him. The toys sat in the darkness, waiting, and somewhere, in a small room 2 floors below, a little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes slept fitfully in the corner, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. Dreaming of monsters she couldn't escape. She didn't know it yet, but someone was watching over her now. Someone who had made a promise he intended to keep. 1 week passed. Small changes crept in like morning light through curtains, quiet, gradual, almost imperceptible, unless you knew where to look. Emma still slept in the corner of her room, still woke before dawn, still flinched at sudden noises and unexpected movements. But the bread disappeared from under her pillow, not all at once. First, she stopped hiding dinner rolls, then the breakfast pastries. Then, on the 5th day, she left an apple on the nightstand, instead of stuffing it into her pocket. She didn't trust that food would always be there. Not yet, maybe not ever, but she was beginning to believe just a little that it might be there tomorrow. Uncle Tony noticed. Every morning at 5, Emma appeared in his kitchen like a small ghost in an oversized coat. She no longer crept to the trash bins. Instead, she climbed onto the stool he had placed by the prep counter, her stool now. Everyone knew and waited. And she talked. Not much, not loud, but more than before. "Uncle Tony, what's that?" "Risotto, little one. Rice cooked very slow, with butter and cheese. It smells nice. You want to stir? Very important job. Must stir always, never stop." She stirred, carefully, seriously, as if the fate of the world depended on that risotto. Antonio watched her small hands grip the wooden spoon. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and felt something warm spread through his chest. He had called Isabella that night, for the first time in 8 months. His granddaughter's voice, sleepy and surprised, had made him cry into his pillow like a child. Next month, he would visit Sicily. He had already bought the ticket. Sarah Mitchell noticed the changes too. The floor manager had kept her distance at first, watching, evaluating, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Homeless children didn't just appear in five-star restaurants. There had to be a catch, a scam, something. But days passed, and there was no catch. Just a little girl who said please and thank you and I'm sorry more than any child should. On the fourth day, Sarah brought Emma a coloring book and crayons. I found these in the storage room, she said stiffly. They're old, from some charity event. I thought you might want them. Emma had looked up at her with those enormous blue eyes, and Sarah stern, suspicious. Trust no one. Sarah had felt her heart crack just a little. Now, a week later, Emma could look her in the eyes, briefly, nervously, but she could do it. Progress. But there was one person Emma could not look at. Dominic. Every time he entered a room, she shrank, made herself smaller, pressed against the nearest wall, or hid behind Uncle Tony's legs, or simply froze. Eyes on the floor, body rigid with fear. She never spoke to him, never approached him, never even glanced in his direction if she could help it. Dominic noticed. He kept his distance, deliberately, carefully. He never walked too close to her, never raised his voice in her presence, never made any sudden movements when she was nearby. But it didn't help. She was still terrified of him. Marcus found Dominic in his office late one night, staring at nothing. She's doing better, Marcus said, closing the door behind him. Tony said she laughed yesterday. Actually laughed. First time since she got here. Dominic said nothing. Sarah's warming up to her too. And Dr. Park says the frostbite is healing well. Another week, and she'll be able to wear shoes without. She's afraid of me. The words fell like stones into still water. Marcus paused, considered, then nodded slowly. Yes, she is. Why? Dominic's voice was flat, but something raw flickered beneath. I haven't raised a hand to her, haven't raised my voice. I've barely spoken to her at all. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Boss, you remember what Dr. Park said? About the injuries, about who did that to her? Dominic's jaw tightened. A man did those things, Marcus continued quietly. A man she trusted, a man who was supposed to protect her. And now, when she looks at you tall, powerful, commanding, she doesn't see Dominic Blackwood. She sees him. Silence. She's not afraid of you specifically, Marcus said. She's afraid of what you represent. Every man who ever hurt her. Every man who ever could. Dominic closed his eyes. He thought of the cigarette burns on her arms, the lash marks on her back, the broken ribs that had never healed right. A man had done that. A man she had called family. No wonder she couldn't look at him. What do I do? The question came out rough, almost broken. Marcus turned from the window. For a moment, he looked at his boss, this man he had followed for 20 years. This man who had built an empire from nothing. This man who could make grown men tremble with a glance and saw something he had never seen before. Helplessness. You wait, Marcus said simply. You give her space. You let her see day after day, week after week that you're not like him. That not all men are monsters. He paused. And when she's ready, if she's ever ready, you let her come to you. Dominic opened his eyes, stared at the ceiling. And if she's never ready? Marcus shrugged. Then you keep waiting. That's what fathers do. The word hung in the air. Heavy, unexpected. Father? Dominic said nothing. But something shifted in his chest. A door opening, just a crack, to a room he had kept locked for 20 years. He would wait. However long it took, he would wait. The scream shattered the silence of the night. High, piercing, primal. The kind of scream that came from somewhere deeper than the throat, from the place where all the worst memories lived. Dominic was out of bed before his eyes fully opened. He ran down the corridor in bare feet and a white undershirt, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had heard screams before, screams of men who had betrayed him, screams of enemies who had underestimated him, but this was different. This was a child. He reached Emma's door before Marcus, before Sarah, before anyone else. His hand found the handle, turned, pushed. The room was dark. The lamp had been knocked over. The only light came from the corridor behind him, casting a long yellow rectangle across the carpet. And in the far corner, the same corner where she always slept, Emma sat curled into a tight ball, her arms wrapped around her head, rocking back and forth, screaming. No, no, please, don't put me in there. I'll be good. I'll be quiet. I promise. Please don't. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing the room. She was somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold and terrible. Dominic stepped inside. Emma. She didn't hear him. The screaming continued, raw, desperate, tearing at something deep in his chest. Please. I can't breathe. It's dark. I can't. He moved closer, slowly, carefully, the way one approaches a wounded animal. Emma. Listen to my voice. Still nothing. She was trapped in the nightmare, drowning in memories that wouldn't let her go. Dominic crouched down 3 feet away from her. Close enough to be heard. Far enough not to crowd. Emma. His voice was soft. Steady. An anchor in the storm. You're at Obsidian. You're safe. No one is going to hurt you. No one is going to lock you anywhere. The screaming faded to whimpers. Her rocking slowed. That's it, he murmured. You're here. In your room. With the soft carpet and the big bed. Remember? Uncle Tony made you rabbit pizza today. Sarah gave you new crayons. Emma's arms loosened around her head. Her breathing was still ragged. But the wild panic was receding. You're safe, Dominic repeated. I promise. You're safe. Slowly, so slowly, Emma's eyes began to focus. She blinked. Once. Twice. The nightmare released its grip, and reality crept back in. She saw the room, the overturned lamp, the rectangle of light from the corridor, and she saw Dominic, crouched before her, his gray eyes soft in a way she had never seen. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Emma's face crumpled. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be loud. I tried not to scream. I tried. Don't apologize. She flinched at his voice but didn't pull away. What did you dream about? Dominic asked quietly. Emma's lower lip trembled. She hugged Rosie tighter against her chest, as if the worn rabbit could protect her from the memories. The basement, she whispered. They used to lock me in the basement. When I was bad, it was dark, so dark, and cold, and I couldn't get out. I would scream and scream but nobody came. Her voice broke. I'm scared of the dark. I know I'm too old to be scared of the dark. The girls aren't supposed to be scared. But I can't. Dominic stood. Emma shrank back, expecting him to leave. Expecting disappointment. Expecting the door to close, and the darkness to swallow her again. Instead, he walked to the wall and flipped on every light switch. The overhead light blazed to life. The bathroom light. The closet light. Every lamp. Every fixture. Every source of illumination in the room. The darkness vanished. Then Dominic returned to the corner. And he sat down. Not on the bed, not on the chair. He lowered himself to the carpet, his back against the wall, right beside where Emma was curled. What are you doing? She whispered, sitting. But, why? Because you're scared, and no one should be scared alone. Emma stared at him. This man, this tall, powerful, terrifying man sitting on the floor of her room in the middle of the night, just so she wouldn't be alone. I'll stay here until you fall asleep, he said quietly. The lights will stay on. No one will lock you anywhere. And if you have another nightmare, I'll be right here. Emma's eyes filled with fresh tears. But these were different. Not tears of fear or pain. Something else. She didn't move closer to him. Wasn't ready for that yet. But she didn't move away either. She simply curled up in her corner, clutching Rosie, and closed her eyes. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she fell asleep knowing someone was watching over her. Morning light crept through the curtains. Emma stirred, blinked. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she remembered. The nightmare, the screaming, the man who had turned on all the lights. She looked to her left. Dominic was still there, still sitting against the wall, still in the same spot. His head was tilted back, his eyes half closed with exhaustion. But he was awake. He had been awake all night. He looked at her, said nothing. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. You didn't leave? Dominic shook his head slowly. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, because I promised. Something shifted in Emma's chest. A tiny crack in the wall she had built around herself. A single brick loosened from the fortress of fear. She didn't smile. Wasn't ready for that. But she looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since she had arrived. And she wasn't afraid. 2 days after the nightmare, Emma came to find him. Dominic was in his office, reviewing documents he couldn't focus on, when he heard a soft knock at the door. So soft he almost missed it. Come in. The door opened slowly. A small face peered through the gap, blonde hair still tangled from sleep, blue eyes uncertain. Rosie clutched against her chest like a shield. Emma. She had never come to his office before, had never sought him out willingly, had always kept her distance, watching him from afar like a deer watching a wolf. But something had changed since that night. since he had sat on the floor beside her until morning, since he had kept his promise. "Can I come in?" she whispered. Dominic set down his pen. "Of course." Emma slipped through the door and closed it behind her. She stood there for a moment, small and uncertain, her bandaged feet shuffling against the carpet. Then she walked to the leather chair across from his desk and climbed onto it. Her legs dangled, not reaching the floor. She looked even smaller, surrounded by the dark furniture and heavy curtains. Dominic waited. He had learned, over the past week, that Emma needed time, needed space, needed to find her own way to the words. Finally, she spoke. "I want to tell you something." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Her fingers twisted in Rosie's worn fur. "You don't have to tell me anything," Dominic said quietly. "Not until you're ready." Emma shook her head. "I want to. So you know." She paused. Swallowed. "So you know why I'm bad." The words hit Dominic like a fist to the chest. "Why I'm bad." This child, this broken, starved, tortured child, still believed she deserved what had happened to her. He wanted to tell her she wasn't bad, wanted to grab whoever had put that thought in her head and break them apart with his bare hands. But he said nothing. Just waited. Let her find her way. Emma stared at Rosie's face, avoiding his eyes. "My mommy's name was Rose," she began. "Like the flower. Like Rosie." She touched the rabbit's torn ear. "Daddy gave me Rosie because Mommy bought her. Before I was born. It was supposed to be my first toy." Her voice dropped lower, "But Mommy never got to give it to me. Because..." She stopped. Her small body trembled. "Because I killed her." The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Dominic didn't move, didn't breathe. "I didn't mean to," Emma continued, her voice cracking. "But when I was being born, something went wrong. Daddy said there was too much blood. The doctors tried to save her, but they couldn't. She died. Because of me." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "Daddy never said it was my fault. He always said he loved me. He said Mommy loved me too, even though she never got to hold me. But I knew that if I hadn't been born, Mommy would still be alive." She finally looked up at Dominic. Her eyes, those ancient, exhausted eyes, held a grief too heavy for any child to carry. "Daddy was sad all the time. He smiled at me, and he hugged me, and he read me stories. But when he thought I wasn't looking, he would stare at Mommy's picture and cry. I could hear him at night, through the walls." Her voice grew smaller. "I tried to make him happy. I tried to be really, really good. But it didn't work. He was always sad. And then he went away too." Dominic's hands curled into fists beneath the desk. "What happened?" he asked, his voice rough. "He worked at a big building, with machines and metal and stuff. One day, there was an accident. Something fell on him." Emma hugged Rosie tighter. "I was 4. A lady came to our house and told me Daddy wasn't coming home anymore." She fell silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. "After that, they sent me to Aunt Linda. She was Mommy's sister. I didn't really know her, she lived far away. And Daddy said they didn't talk much. But she was the only family I had left." A ghost of something, not quite a smile, not quite hope, flickered across Emma's face. "At first, it was okay. Aunt Linda was nice. She hugged me and said everything would be all right. She said she would take care of me, just like Mommy would have wanted." The flicker faded. "She had this perfume. It smelled like roses, like Mommy's name. I remember thinking maybe it would be okay. Maybe I could have a family again." Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "She let me sleep in a real bed, made me pancakes for breakfast, brushed my hair and told me I was pretty. For a little while, I thought maybe someone wanted me after all." Dominic watched her small face, the way hope and pain warred in her eyes, the way her fingers gripped the rabbit as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. "What changed?" he asked quietly. Emma looked down at her lap. The silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating, full of all the darkness yet to come. "She met someone," Emma finally said. "A man. She said he was going to be my new uncle. She said he would be part of our family." Her voice went flat, empty, the voice of a child who had learned to speak about horror without feeling it. "His name was Victor." She looked up at Dominic, and in her eyes, he saw the shadow of every nightmare she had ever had. "And after he came, everything changed." Emma's voice grew quieter as she continued, smaller, as if speaking the words aloud might summon the monsters back. "Victor was nice at first. He smiled a lot, brought Aunt Linda flowers, told me I was cute." She paused. Her fingers dug deeper into Rosie's worn fur. "But after they got married, He changed. Dominic sat motionless behind his desk. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just let her speak at her own pace. Even as every word carved another scar into his chest. He drank a lot. The stuff in the brown bottles. It made him smell bad and walk funny. And sometimes it made him angry. Emma's eyes went distant, unfocused, like she was looking at something far away, something only she could see. The first time he hit me, I spilled juice on the carpet. I didn't mean to. My hands were shaky because I was trying really hard to be careful, but the glass slipped. Her voice flattened, emptied of emotion. The defense mechanism of a child who had learned to disconnect from her own pain. He said I was stupid, clumsy, a waste of money. He said I ate too much, cost too much, took up too much space. He said Aunt Linda should have left me at the orphanage where I belonged. She hugged Rosie tighter. I tried to eat less. I really did. I would only eat half my food and hide the rest, so he wouldn't say I was greedy, but it was never enough. Nothing was ever enough. Dominic's jaw clenched so hard he felt his teeth might crack. When I did something wrong, spilled something, made noise, forgot to do a chore, he would take me to the basement. Emma's breathing quickened. Her small body began to tremble. The basement was dark. So dark. There were no windows, no lights, just nothing. He would lock the door and leave me there. Her voice cracked. Sometimes for 1 day, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. No food, no water, just dark and cold and the sound of my own breathing. She looked up at Dominic, and in her eyes was the hollow terror of a child who had lived through hell. I would scream at first, bang on the door, beg him to let me out. I promised I would be good. I promised I would never make mistakes again. But nobody came. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I screamed until my voice stopped working, until my throat was so raw I couldn't make any sound at all. And still, nobody came. Dominic's hands were shaking beneath the desk. He pressed them flat against his thighs, fighting for control. Sometimes, when he was really angry, he would use his belt. Emma's hand moved unconsciously to her back, to the scars hidden beneath her shirt. He said it was to teach me a lesson, to make me remember not to be bad. He said all children needed discipline, and I needed more than most because I was so stupid. She fell silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. And when I cried, he would burn me. Dominic stopped breathing. He had these cigarettes. He would take one and press it against my arm, or my leg, and hold it there until I stopped crying. Emma looked at the circular scars on her forearm, 7 small circles, evenly spaced, like a constellation of suffering. He said it was so I would remember not to cry. Big girls don't cry, he said. Only babies cry. And if I was going to act like a baby, he would give me something to really cry about. Her lower lip trembled. So I learned not to cry. Even when it hurt so much I couldn't breathe, I learned to be quiet, to be invisible, to not exist. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Aunt Linda knew. She saw the marks. She saw me limping after the basement days. She would look at me with these sad eyes and sometimes she would cry. Emma's voice hardened, just a fraction, just enough. But she never stopped him. She never called the police. She never took me away. She just watched, and cried, and did nothing. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Each second felt like an eternity. Then one night, I heard them talking. Emma's eyes went wide, haunted, the memory still fresh, still raw. Victor had been drinking more than usual. He had lost a lot of money. I didn't know what gambling was then, but I do now. He was angry, throwing things, yelling at Aunt Linda. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And then he said something. About me. She looked at Dominic. Her blue eyes were ancient, broken, the eyes of a child who had been forced to understand the darkest parts of the adult world. He said I was worthless. A burden. A mouth to feed with nothing to offer. He said he knew people who would pay money for a girl like me. He said I was young enough that I would bring a good price. Dominic felt something inside him snap. Cold, clean, final. I didn't understand all the words, Emma continued, but I understood enough. He wanted to sell me, like a toy, like a thing. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't sob, didn't wail. She had learned too well how to cry in silence. That night, he passed out on the couch. Aunt Linda went to their room and locked the door. And I climbed out the basement window. Her small hands twisted in her lap. It was 3 a.m, cold, dark. I was barefoot because he had taken my shoes away, said I didn't deserve shoes until I earned them. I didn't know where to go, didn't know anyone who could help. I just ran. She hugged Rosie against her heart. I walked for 3 days, slept in alleys, ate from trash cans. People looked at me like I was invisible, or like I was something dirty they didn't want to touch. Her voice broke completely. And then I saw your restaurant, all the pretty lights, all the warm glow, and I thought, maybe someone there would want me. She looked up at Dominic with shattered eyes. I didn't want money. I didn't want food. I just wanted anyone to want me. To look at me and not see a burden. To not sell me. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma wiped her tears with trembling hands. That's why I asked that question. Outside in the snow. That's why I said I could wash dishes and mop floors. Her voice was barely a whisper now. I walked for 3 days. I don't know where I was going. I just knew. I didn't want to be sold. Silence. It stretched between them, heavy, suffocating, alive with all the horrors Emma had just spoken into existence. Dominic had not moved throughout her story, had not interrupted, had not made a single sound, but his hands told a different story. Beneath the desk, his fingers were curled into fists so tight his knuckles had turned white. His nails dug into his palms hard enough to draw blood. Every muscle in his body was rigid, coiled, barely contained. 20 years of building walls. 20 years of burying every feeling that could be used against him. 20 years of becoming the Black King, cold, ruthless, untouchable. And this child, this broken, starving, tortured child, had shattered all of it with her quiet words. Emma misread his silence. She saw his stillness, his clenched jaw, his unreadable expression, and she understood it the only way she knew how. He was angry, disappointed, disgusted. She had told him too much, made him uncomfortable, been a burden, just like Victor always said. Her head dropped, her shoulders hunched. She made herself smaller in the chair, curling inward like she was trying to disappear. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have told you all that. I know I'm a lot of trouble. I understand if you don't want me here anymore. I can leave. I won't make a fuss. Dominic stood. Emma flinched, bracing for anger, for rejection, for the door to open and the cold to swallow her again. But he didn't point to the door. He walked around the desk, slowly, deliberately, each step measured, controlled, as if he was afraid of frightening her. He stopped in front of her chair, and then Dominic Blackwood, the Black King, the man who hadn't shown weakness in 2 decades, the man whose enemies trembled at the mention of his name, did something he hadn't done since he was 16 years old. He knelt down, and he wrapped his arms around her. Emma went rigid, her whole body locked up, every muscle, every nerve, every instinct screaming that this was wrong, that touch meant pain, that arms around her meant being trapped. No one had hugged her since her father died. No one had held her with gentleness instead of violence. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to respond, didn't know if this was real or another cruel trick. But Dominic didn't let go. He held her carefully, gently, his large frame curved around her small one like a shield. He didn't squeeze too tight, didn't trap her, just held. And slowly, so slowly, Emma's rigid body began to soften. Her tiny arms lifted, hesitated, then wrapped around his neck, and she held on, like he was the only solid thing in a world that had always been quicksand. Like letting go meant drowning. She didn't cry. She had no tears left, but her small body trembled against his, and her fingers gripped his shirt so hard the fabric stretched. Dominic's voice was rough when he finally spoke. Rough and low and fierce. Listen to me, Emma. She pulled back just enough to look at his face. His gray eyes were burning with something she had never seen before, not anger, not pity, but something deeper, something protective, something almost fatherly. He will never touch you again. The words were not a comfort. They were a vow. No one will ever lock you in darkness again. No one will ever burn you. No one will ever make you feel like you're worthless. His hands cupped her small face, thumbs wiping away tears she didn't know she had shed. I promise you, Emma, on everything I am, on everything I have, I promise. Emma stared at him. This man who had knelt in the snow to talk to her, who had given her his coat, who had sat on the floor all night so she wouldn't be scared. She had heard promises before, from Aunt Linda, from social workers, from strangers who said they would help and never did. But looking into Dominic's eyes now, she saw something she had never seen in any of them. Truth, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she believed. Mr. Dominic? Her voice was tiny, fragile, barely there. Yes, can I She swallowed. Her fingers twisted in Rosie's fur. Can I stay? Here? With you? The question hung in the air, weighted with every rejection she had ever faced. Every time she had been sent away. Every door that had closed in her face. Dominic looked at her. At this child who had walked through hell and somehow still had enough hope left to ask. For as long as you want, he said quietly. For as long as you want, Emma. This is your home now. Emma's lower lip trembled, and then she did something she hadn't done since Victor first raised his hand. She smiled. Small. Fragile. Barely there. But real. 3 weeks passed. And Obsidian, the cold, elegant fortress of the Black King, began to change. It started with small things. A child's laughter echoing through the kitchen at 5 a.m, crayon drawings appearing on the staff bulletin board. A small stool permanently stationed by the prep counter, always waiting for its owner. Emma stopped hiding food. Not all at once. The habit was too deeply ingrained for that. But day by day, the bread disappeared from under her pillow. The apples stopped filling her pockets. She began to trust slowly, cautiously, that there would be more tomorrow. She still slept in the corner of her room some nights. Still flinched at loud noises. Still went quiet and small when strangers came too close. But the shadows in her eyes were fading. Uncle Tony became her constant companion in the kitchen. Every morning, she climbed onto her stool and watched him cook, asking endless questions in her quiet voice. What's that spice? Why does the pasta have to boil? Can I stir again? Antonio answered every question with patience he didn't know he had. He taught her to knead dough, to sprinkle cheese, to arrange tomatoes by size. And when she inevitably made a mess, flour on her nose, sauce on her shirt, pasta stuck to the ceiling, that one memorable time he just laughed and handed her a towel. He had booked his flight to Sicily, 2 weeks away. For the first time in 3 years, he would see Isabella. Aunt Sarah took longer to warm up, but somewhere between the 3rd coloring book and the 5th hair braiding session, the ice around her heart began to crack. She taught Emma to write her letters slowly, patiently, one wobbly line at a time. She bought her new crayons when the old ones wore down. She pretended not to notice when Emma started calling her Aunt Sarah instead of Miss Mitchell. Marcus was the surprise, the massive, stone-faced enforcer. The man who had broken bones and buried secrets without blinking, turned into putty the moment Emma looked up at him with those big blue eyes. He taught her to high five, then low five, then the super secret special handshake that involved 3 claps, 2 fist bumps, and a ridiculous wiggling of fingers that made Emma giggle every single time. Don't tell anyone, Marcus said gruffly, after a particularly elaborate handshake session. I have a reputation. Emma nodded solemnly. I won't tell. Pinky promise. She held out her tiny pinky. Marcus, 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle and menace, hooked his enormous pinky around hers with the gentleness of handling glass. But the biggest change was with Dominic. Emma didn't call him Mr. anymore. Didn't flinch when he entered a room. Didn't shrink away when he walked past. Instead, she followed him, everywhere, to his office, where she sat in the corner and colored while he worked, to the dining room, where she helped him inspect the table settings with exaggerated seriousness, to the kitchen, where she introduced him to her latest culinary creation, usually something involving too much cheese and not enough cooking. Mr. Dom, look what Uncle Tony taught me. Mr. Dom, Aunt Sarah says my letters are getting better. Mr. Dom, can I show you something? Mr. Dom. The nickname had appeared out of nowhere, a child's simplification of a name too formal for her small mouth. The first time she said it, the entire kitchen went silent. Everyone waited for the Black King to correct her, to insist on proper respect. He didn't. He just looked at her with those gray eyes and said, "What is it, Emma?" After that, no one dared say a word. On the 21st day, Emma gave him a drawing. She approached his office with Rosie under one arm, and a piece of paper clutched in her other hand. Her face was nervous, uncertain, the look of someone offering something precious and fearing rejection. I made this, she said quietly. For you, if you want it. Dominic took the paper. It was a crayon drawing, messy and uneven, and utterly perfect. A house with a red roof and yellow windows. A tall figure with black hair standing next to a small figure with yellow hair. A white rabbit with long ears sitting at their feet. Bright sunshine pouring down from a blue sky. And at the bottom, in wobbly, misspelled letters, my family. Dominic stared at the drawing for a long time. Something cracked in his chest. Not painfully. More like ice breaking in spring. A thaw he hadn't known he needed. It's beautiful, he said. His voice was rough. Emma's face lit up. Really? Really? He stood, walked to the wall behind his desk, the wall where he kept nothing. Because sentiment was weakness, and weakness was death, and he pinned the drawing right in the center. Emma watched with wide eyes. "You're keeping it?" "Forever," Dominic said. And he meant it. Later that evening, the staff gathered for the dinner service. Emma was in the kitchen with Uncle Tony, taste-testing soup and getting more of it on her shirt than in her mouth. The dining room hummed with the usual symphony of clinking glasses and murmured conversation. Everything was normal. Everything was warm. Everything was finally good. Then Marcus's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 3 seconds, and his face went pale. He found Dominic in the hallway, his expression grim. "Boss?" Dominic looked up. He knew that tone, knew what it meant. "What?" Marcus's jaw tightened. The words came out like stones. "Victor Mercer just walked through our front door." Victor Mercer walked into Obsidian like he owned the place. He was tall and thin, with a narrow face, small calculating eyes, and hair that was thinning and slicked back with too much gel. His suit was expensive but ill-fitting, the kind of suit a man buys to look wealthy rather than because he is. The smell of cheap cologne and stale cigarettes followed him like a shadow. He approached the reception desk with a smile. A charming smile. The kind of smile that had fooled Linda, fooled social workers, fooled everyone who didn't look too closely at the emptiness behind his eyes. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "I'm hoping you can help me. I'm looking for my niece." The hostess, a young woman named Maria, blinked at him uncertainly. "Your niece, sir?" "Yes. Emma Carter, 6 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes. Adorable little thing." Victor's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "She ran away from home a few weeks ago. We've been worried sick, absolutely devastated. And I've heard through various channels that she might be here." Maria's face went carefully blank. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't know anyone by that. Is there a problem?" Sarah Mitchell appeared from nowhere, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Her expression was polite, professional, and absolutely unreadable. Victor turned his charm on her. "Ah, you must be the manager. Wonderful. I was just explaining to this lovely young lady I'm looking for my niece, Emma Carter. I have reason to believe she's been staying here." Sarah didn't blink. "And you are?" "Victor Mercer. I'm her legal guardian." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. "I have the paperwork right here. Custody agreement, signed by the state. Everything above board." Sarah took the paper but didn't look at it. Her eyes stayed fixed on Victor's face. "I see. And what makes you think she's here?" "I have my sources." Victor's smile flickered just for a moment before sliding back into place. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I just want to take my niece home. She's been through a lot, poor thing. Confused, troubled. She has these episodes, makes up stories. I'm sure you understand." Sarah's expression didn't change. "I'll need to check with the owner. Please wait here." She turned and walked toward the back of the restaurant, disappearing through a service door. Victor's smile faded the moment she was gone. His eyes swept the dining room, calculating, assessing, searching for any sign of the girl who had slipped through his fingers. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of searching, of bribing, of calling in every favor he had. And finally, he had found her. The little brat thought she could run, thought she could escape, thought she could cost him everything, the foster payments, the insurance money, all of it, and get away with it. She was wrong. The service door opened. Victor's head snapped toward the sound. A man emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair graying at the temples. He wore no jacket, just a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms that spoke of strength carefully contained. But it was his eyes that made Victor's smile falter. Gray, cold, flat. The eyes of a predator assessing prey. The man walked toward him slowly, deliberately. Each step measured, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. Victor had seen dangerous men before, had dealt with loan sharks and bookies and people who broke bones for a living. He knew how to read them, how to charm them, how to weasel his way out of tight spots. But this man was different. This man looked at him the way a wolf looks at a rabbit, not with anger, not with hatred, just with the calm certainty of something that knows exactly what it is capable of. "Mr. Mercer." The man's voice was quiet, controlled. "I'm Dominic Blackwood. I own this establishment." Victor recovered quickly, pasted his smile back on, extended his hand. "Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure. I was just explaining to your staff, I'm looking for my niece, Emma Carter. I have legal custody, and I have reason to believe there's no one by that name here." The words cut through Victor's speech like a blade. Victor blinked, His hand hung in the air, unshaken. Slowly, he lowered it. I'm sorry, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I have documentation, legal paperwork. The girl is my responsibility, and I have every right to, I said. Dominic repeated, his voice dropping lower. There's no one by that name here. Something flickered in Victor's eyes. The charm slipped. Underneath was something uglier, the real Victor, the one that emerged behind closed doors. Look, I don't know what the girl told you, he said, his voice hardening, but she's a liar, a manipulator. She makes up stories for attention. Whatever she said, it's not true. Dominic said nothing, just looked at him with those cold gray eyes. Victor stepped closer. A mistake. You can't keep her from me. I have rights, legal rights. She's my property, my responsibility, and you have no authority to property. The single word hung in the air like the click of a gun being cocked. Victor froze. You called her property, Dominic said softly. Interesting choice of words. For the first time, Victor felt something cold crawl up his spine. He was used to being the predator, used to being in control. But standing in front of this man, in this restaurant, he suddenly felt like he had walked into a trap he didn't see. I misspoke, he said quickly. I meant, you have 10 seconds to leave my restaurant. Victor's face flushed. Now listen here, you can't just I have legal documentation. I'll call the police. I'll 8. Victor looked around. The dining room had gone quiet. Every guest, every waiter, every staff member was watching. And behind Dominic, emerging from the shadows like ghosts, were 2 large men in dark suits. One of them, a massive bald man with the build of a bear, was cracking his knuckles slowly. Victor swallowed. He knew when he was outmatched, knew when to retreat and regroup. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but this wasn't the time or place. He straightened his jacket, smoothed his hair, forced his smile back into place. Fine, he said, his voice tight with barely contained rage. I'll leave. For now. He turned toward the door, then paused, looked back over his shoulder. But I'll be back, Mr. Blackwood. With police, with lawyers, with court orders. His smile turned ugly. That girl belongs to me, and I always collect what's mine. He walked out into the cold Chicago night. The glass door swung shut behind him. Dominic stood motionless, watching until Victor's figure disappeared into the darkness. Then he turned to Marcus. Find out everything about him, he said quietly. Everything. By morning. Marcus nodded and pulled out his phone. And in the kitchen, hidden behind the prep counter where Uncle Tony had pushed her the moment the shouting started, Emma sat curled in a ball, clutching Rosie, trembling. She had seen him through the window. The monster had found her. It had been a good evening. Emma sat on her stool in the kitchen, watching Uncle Tony prepare the dinner service. He was making her favorite rabbit-shaped pizza with extra cheese while explaining the proper way to knead dough. You see, little one, the secret is patience. You push, you fold, you turn, like a dance. The dough, she tells you when she is ready. Emma nodded seriously, flour dusting her nose. How does she tell you? She becomes soft, smooth, like a baby's cheek. Antonio pinched her flour-covered cheek gently. Like this one here? Emma giggled, and then she looked up. Through the small window that separated the kitchen from the dining room, she could see the front entrance, could see the man standing at the reception desk. Tall, thin, slicked back hair, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Victor. Emma's giggle died in her throat. Her body went rigid. Every muscle, every nerve, every cell locked into place. The color drained from her face until she was white as the flour on the counter. The plate in her hands slipped. It hit the tile floor and shattered into 100 pieces. Emma didn't scream, didn't cry out, didn't make any sound at all. She simply stopped. Her eyes went vacant, empty, like someone had reached inside her and turned off the light. Antonio spun around at the crash. Emma, what? He followed her gaze, saw the man at the reception desk, saw the way Emma had frozen, the way her chest had stopped moving, the way her eyes had gone dead. He didn't know who the man was, didn't need to. He knew that look, the look of a child seeing the monster from her nightmares step into reality. Emma. He kept his voice calm, gentle. Emma, look at me. She didn't respond. Emma, Piccola, come here. Come to Uncle Tony. Nothing. She was a statue. A shell. Her mind had fled to somewhere far away, leaving her body behind. Antonio moved quickly. He scooped her off the stool, cradling her small, rigid body against his chest. She weighed nothing, still too thin, still too fragile. Despite 3 weeks of pasta and pizza and love, He carried her through the kitchen, past the startled prep cooks, through the back corridor, into the small storage room where no one could see. He sat down on an overturned crate, holding her in his lap, rocking her gently the way he used to rock Isabella when she was a baby. Shh, Piccola. Shh. You are safe. Uncle Tony has you. Emma's body began to shake, small tremors at first, then violent shudders that racked her entire frame. No one will touch you, Antonio murmured, his voice fierce despite its softness. No one. Not while I breathe, Uncle Tony promises. He held her tighter, and he prayed to God, to the saints, to anyone listening that he could keep that promise. Dominic found them 20 minutes later. Victor was gone, escorted out, threatened in ways that would give a lesser man nightmares for weeks. But the damage was done. Emma sat in the corner of the storage room, curled into a tight ball, her arms wrapped around Rosie so hard the rabbit's seams were straining. Her eyes were open but unseeing, fixed on something that wasn't there. She was rocking back and forth, mumbling under her breath, the same words, over and over. He found me. He found me. He'll take me back. He always comes back. He always finds me. He'll take me back. Antonio stood nearby, his face gray with worry. He looked at Dominic helplessly. I couldn't get her to stop, boss. She won't stop. Dominic walked slowly to the corner, lowered himself to the floor, sat down 3 feet away from her, close enough to be heard, far enough not to crowd. Emma, the rocking continued, the mumbling continued. Emma, look at me. Nothing. She was trapped in the loop of her own terror, drowning in memories of basements and darkness and pain. Emma, his voice was firmer now, not harsh, but commanding, the voice of someone who expected to be obeyed. Slowly, like a machine grinding back to life, Emma's head turned. Her eyes focused, found his face, and what Dominic saw in those eyes nearly broke him. Resignation, acceptance, the look of a child who had always known this would happen. He found me, she whispered. Her voice was hollow. Dead? He always finds me. He's gone, Emma. I made him leave. She shook her head slowly. He'll come back. He always comes back. And then, her lower lip trembled. I knew it. I knew it couldn't last. Nothing good ever lasts. Not for me. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent tears, the kind she had learned to cry so no one would hear. He'll give me back to him. Everyone gives me back. No one really wants me. I'm too much trouble, too broken, too Emma. She stopped. Dominic moved closer, slowly, carefully, until he was right in front of her, his gray eyes level with her blue ones. Listen to me. Listen carefully. Emma's breath hitched. She clutched Rosie tighter. No one is giving you back. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. His voice was quiet, but underneath was something unbreakable, something that had built an empire from nothing, something that had survived loss and pain and 20 years of darkness. He can bring police. He can bring lawyers. He can bring an army. Dominic's eyes burned with cold fire. I don't care. You are not going anywhere. Emma stared at him, searching his face for the lie, for the crack in the armor, for the moment when he would change his mind like everyone else. She found nothing but truth. I promise you, Emma. He reached out and gently took her small, trembling hand. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, you are staying with me. Emma's walls crumbled. She launched herself forward, wrapping her thin arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder, and for the first time since Victor walked through the door, she let herself cry. Really cry. Loud, ugly, broken sobs that shook her entire body. Dominic held her. Didn't shush her, didn't tell her it would be okay, just held her and let her cry until there was nothing left. And in his mind, a cold, clear voice was already making plans. Victor Mercer wanted a war. He was about to get one. Midnight. Emma was finally asleep. It had taken hours. Hours of holding her while she trembled. Hours of promising that the monster wouldn't get her. Hours of sitting beside her bed, her small hand gripping his, until exhaustion finally pulled her under. Even in sleep, she whimpered. Her fingers twitched around Rosie's worn fur, her face contorted with dreams that Dominic wished he could tear apart with his bare hands. He waited until her breathing steadied, until the trembling stopped, until he was certain she wouldn't wake. Then he rose, closed the door softly behind him, and walked to his office. Marcus was already there. Dominic stood by the window, his back to the room. The Chicago skyline glittered in the darkness, 1,000 lights, 1,000 lives, 1,000 people who had no idea what kind of man stood watching them. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Cold, hard. The face of the Black King. Tell me everything. His voice was calm, quiet. The kind of quiet that made men who knew him take a step back. Marcus didn't step back. He had known Dominic too long for that. But he recognized the tone. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't planning. This was war. He opened the folder in his hands. Victor Mercer, 52 years old, born in Detroit, moved to Chicago 8 years ago. Married Linda Mercer, Emma's maternal aunt, 3 years ago. Marcus flipped a page. Employment history is spotty. Lost 4 jobs in 5 years. Theft, misconduct, showing up drunk, currently unemployed. His only income is Linda's salary and the foster care payments for Emma. Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. $800 a month from the state, Marcus continued. Meant for Emma's care. Food, clothing, education. Our sources say none of it ever reached her. Silence. There's more. Marcus's voice hardened. He has gambling debts. Serious ones. $200,000 owed to the Vasquez cartel. Dominic turned his head slightly. The Vasquez cartel was not known for patience. Or mercy. He's been dodging them for 6 months, Marcus said. Running out of places to hide. Running out of time. What else? Marcus flipped another page. Prior conviction for domestic violence. His first wife before Linda. Filed charges, then dropped them. Moved out of state. No forwarding address. He paused. And there's the insurance policy. Dominic turned fully now, his gray eyes fixed on Marcus. Daniel Carter, Emma's father, had a life insurance policy. $100,000, held in trust for Emma until she turns 18. Victor has been trying to access it for 2 years. As her legal guardian, he has limited control. But if something were to happen to Emma, the words hung in the air like poison. He gets the full payout, Marcus finished quietly. The office went completely still. Dominic didn't move, didn't speak. But the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He called her property, he said finally. His voice was soft, almost gentle. The most dangerous voice Marcus had ever heard. He tortured her for 2 years. Starved her, burned her, locked her in darkness. And now he wants her back, not because he cares about her, but because she's worth money to him. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Dead or alive, she's just a paycheck. Marcus nodded slowly. There's one more thing, boss. He's been watching the restaurant. Our men spotted him yesterday, parked across the street, taking photos, making calls. He'll make a move, soon, probably. He's desperate. The Vasquez people are closing in. He needs that money one way or another. Dominic turned back to the window. His reflection stared back, cold, calculating, lethal. A normal man would call the police, file reports, trust the system to protect an innocent child. But Dominic Blackwood was not a normal man, and he had learned, long ago, that the system didn't protect people like Emma. The system had failed her already, failed her mother, failed her father, failed every child who slipped through the cracks into the hands of monsters. No. This required a different kind of justice. Let him make his move, Dominic said quietly. I want him to try. I want evidence. Something concrete. Something undeniable. He turned to face Marcus. And when he does, when he shows his hand, I want him brought to me. Marcus nodded. He didn't ask what would happen after. He didn't need to. Increase security around Emma, Dominic continued. 2 men at all times. Eyes on her every moment she's outside this building. But do it quietly. I don't want her to know. Boss? Dominic's voice softened just barely. Just enough. She's finally starting to feel safe. Finally starting to trust. I won't take that from her. He paused. She's been scared long enough. Let her have peace for as long as we can give it to her. Marcus closed the folder. And when Mercer makes his move, Dominic's eyes went cold, flat, the eyes of the Black King. Then I'll show him what happens to people who hurt what's mine. 5 days later, the afternoon was cold and quiet. The kind of winter day that felt like the world was holding its breath. Light snow drifted down from a pale gray sky, dusting the trees and benches of the small park across from Obsidian. Emma walked beside Uncle Tony, her small hand tucked into his large warm one. She was wearing a new coat, red, puffy, the warmest thing she had ever owned, and actual shoes with thick soles that kept her feet dry. Rosie peeked out from under her arm, button eyes watching the world go by. Uncle Tony, look. She pointed at a squirrel scrambling up an oak tree, its cheeks stuffed with something it had found. He's so fat, Emma giggled. He looks like a fluffy ball, Antonio laughed, his breath forming white clouds in the cold air. He is preparing for winter, little one, storing food. Very smart, that squirrel. Like how I used to hide bread under my pillow. The words came out casual, innocent, the way children spoke of their trauma once they felt safe enough to name it. Antonio's heart clenched. Yes, Piccolina. But you don't need to do that anymore. Remember? Emma nodded, her eyes still on the squirrel. I know, because there's always more food tomorrow. She said it like she was reciting a lesson, like she was still teaching herself to believe it. They walked a little further, past the frozen fountain, past the empty playground, past the benches dusted with snow. Emma pointed at everything: a cardinal in a bare branch, a dog being walked by its owner, patterns in the frost on the iron fence. She was happy. For the first time in her life, she was truly, completely happy. And then the van appeared. It came from nowhere. A black van, windowless, unmarked, that screeched around the corner and jumped the curb, skidding to a stop just 20 feet away. The side door slid open. 2 men jumped out, large, rough, faces hard with purpose. They moved fast. Antonio's instincts kicked in before his mind caught up. 20 years in Dominic's world had taught him to recognize danger, and these men were not here to talk. He shoved Emma behind him. Run, he roared. Run, Emma. But Emma couldn't run. Her legs had turned to stone. Her lungs had forgotten how to breathe. All she could see was the van, black, windowless, hungry, and all she could hear was the echo of a story Dominic had never told her, but that lived in his eyes every time he looked at her. A black van, a little girl. Hands reaching out. The first man reached Antonio. The chef was 58 years old, overweight, built for kneading dough rather than fighting, but he had grown up in the back alleys of Naples. And he had not forgotten how to throw a punch. His fist connected with the man's jaw, a satisfying crack. The man stumbled, but the second man was faster. Something hard hit Antonio in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping. A knee came up, caught him in the face, and he went down crashing onto the frozen ground, blood streaming from his nose. Uncle Tony, Emma screamed. High, piercing, primal. The first man recovered, turned toward her, reached out with grabbing hands. Come here, you little. Emma clutched Rosie and screamed again. The sound tore through the quiet park, shattering the winter silence. And then chaos. They came from everywhere. 3 men in dark suits materialized from behind trees, from parked cars, from shadows that had seemed empty moments before. They moved with military precision, fast, coordinated, deadly. Marcus led them. He hit the first kidnapper from behind a chokehold that dropped the man in seconds. The second kidnapper turned, saw the wall of muscle bearing down on him, and tried to run. He didn't get far. 2 of Marcus's men intercepted him, slammed him against the van, pinned him to the cold metal. The crack of his head against the door echoed across the park. The whole thing took less than 30 seconds. Marcus stood over the fallen men, barely breathing hard. His eyes swept the scene. Antonio struggling to sit up, blood on his face. Emma frozen in place, clutching her rabbit, eyes wide and glassy with shock. He spoke into his earpiece. Targets neutralized. Packages secure. Then he moved to Emma. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her, just crouched down, the way Dominic had taught him, and spoke softly. Emma, it's me, it's Marcus. You're safe now. She stared at him, through him. Her small body was trembling so hard she could barely stand. They tried to. I know, but they didn't. We stopped them. You're okay. Antonio limped over, one hand pressed to his bleeding nose. Is she hurt? Emma, are you hurt? Emma didn't answer. She just stood there, frozen, clutching Rosie like a lifeline. She had thought she was safe. Thought the monster couldn't reach her anymore. She was wrong. Marcus left his men to secure the kidnappers and pulled out his phone. One of them, the one who had tried to grab Emma, had a cell phone in his pocket. Marcus had already checked it. One text message, received 2 hours ago, from V. Grab the girl, bring her back. Don't damage the merchandise, she's worth more intact. Merchandise. Marcus's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He dialed Dominic's number. It rang once. Report. Marcus looked at Emma, small, shaking, broken all over again. They made their move, he said quietly. 2 men, black van, tried to grab her in the park. Silence on the other end, the kind of silence that preceded storms. Emma, safe, scared, but safe. Tony took a beating protecting her, but he'll live. More silence. And the men? We have them, and we have evidence. Marcus glanced at the phone in his hand. Text message from Victor Mercer, ordering the kidnapping. In writing. The silence that followed was absolute, cold, final. When Dominic spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Bring them to the warehouse. And find Mercer. The line went dead. Marcus pocketed the phone and turned to his men. "You heard the boss. Load them up. We're going to the docks." The warehouse sat at the edge of the South Chicago docks, a forgotten skeleton of rust and concrete where the city's darkness came to conduct its business. No streetlights reached this far. No patrol cars drove these roads. The only sounds were the distant groan of cargo ships and the slap of black water against rotting pilings. This was the place where screams went unheard, where problems disappeared, where the Black King held court. Victor Mercer stood in the center of the empty space, his hands bound behind his back with zip ties that bit into his wrists. His expensive suit was torn, his slicked hair disheveled, his face pale with the kind of fear that stripped away all pretense. Around him, 6 men stood in a loose circle. Large, silent, expressionless. The kind of men who had done things that would haunt normal people for the rest of their lives, and slept soundly afterward. A single industrial light hung from the ceiling, casting a harsh yellow pool in the darkness. Victor stood in the center of that light like an insect pinned to a board. He had been here for 2 hours. No one had spoken to him. No one had explained. No one had answered his increasingly desperate questions. They just watched and waited. Then the door opened. Dominic Blackwood walked in slowly. Each footstep echoed through the warehouse, measured, deliberate, unhurried. He wore a black overcoat, his hands in his pockets, his face utterly calm. He looked like a man taking a casual evening stroll. He looked like death. Victor's bravado crumbled the moment he saw him. "Mr. Blackwood, listen, this is all a misunderstanding." Dominic stopped 10 feet away, said nothing, just looked at him with those gray eyes, cold, flat, empty of anything human. Victor swallowed. "Try it again. Look, I just want my niece back, okay? That's all. She's family. I'm her legal guardian. Whatever she told you, she's lying. She's disturbed. She makes up stories for attention. I just want to take her home and get her the help she needs." Silence. "I'm a reasonable man," Victor continued, his voice rising with desperation. "We can work something out. You're a businessman, right? So am I. Everything has a price. Just tell me what you want." Dominic tilted his head slightly. "What I want," he said quietly, "is for you to stop talking." Victor's mouth snapped shut. Dominic reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. He held it up for a moment, letting Victor see it, letting the fear build, and then tossed it onto the concrete floor. Papers scattered across the ground, photographs, documents, records. "Do you know what that is?" Dominic asked. Victor stared at the papers. His face went from pale to gray. "That," Dominic continued, "is your life. Every lie, every crime, every dirty secret you thought was buried." He began to circle Victor slowly. A predator circling prey. 3 years of foster care fraud. $800 a month meant for Emma's food, clothing, education, funneled into your pockets instead. Into your gambling. Into your drinking. Victor opened his mouth to protest. "Don't." The single word stopped him cold. "I have bank records, transaction histories, receipts, everything." Dominic kept walking, kept circling. "Previous conviction for domestic violence. Your first wife. You beat her for 2 years before she found the courage to leave." He paused. "She moved 3 states away, changed her name, still has nightmares about you." Victor's face twisted. "That was, and then there's the matter of $200,000 you owe the Vasquez cartel." Victor went completely still. "Yes," Dominic said softly. "I know about that too. They've been looking for you, Victor." Very eagerly. Sweat beaded on Victor's forehead. His bound hands trembled behind his back. "But all of that," Dominic continued, stopping directly in front of him, "is nothing compared to what you did to Emma." His voice dropped lower, colder. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to plummet. "You burned cigarettes into the skin of a 6-year-old child. 7 times, slowly, deliberately, while she screamed and begged you to stop." Victor flinched like he'd been struck. "You locked her in a basement. No light, no food, no water. For days at a time. You let her scream until her voice gave out. And then you left her there in the darkness." Dominic leaned closer. His gray eyes bore into Victor's like drills. "You beat her with a belt until her back was nothing but scars. You broke her ribs and didn't bother to take her to a doctor. You made her believe she was worthless. Made her apologize for existing. Made her think that if she was good enough, quiet enough, small enough, maybe you wouldn't hurt her again." Victor's legs were shaking now. "And when none of that was enough," Dominic said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you tried to sell her." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "I have the text message. Victor, grab the girl. Bring her back. Don't damage the merchandise, she's worth more intact." Dominic straightened. Merchandise. That's what you called her. A child. A human being. Merchandise. Victor's knees buckled. He would have fallen if two of Dominic's men hadn't grabbed his arms and held him upright. Please, he whimpered. Please. I'll do anything. I'll give you money. I'll disappear. You're right. Dominic cut him off. You will disappear. He reached into his coat again and pulled out another document. Held it up. This is a legal document relinquishing all parental rights and guardianship claims over Emma Carter. You will sign it. Tonight. Victor nodded frantically. Yes, I'll sign. Whatever you want. After you sign, you will leave Chicago. Tonight, you will never return. You will never contact Emma. You will never speak her name. You will forget she exists. I will. I promise. I swear. Dominic stepped closer. His voice went soft. Almost gentle. Because if I ever see your face again, if I ever hear that you've come within 100 miles of that little girl, I won't give you another choice. He paused. I'll simply call the Vasquez cartel and tell them exactly where to find you. All the color drained from Victor's face. Do we understand each other? Victor's legs gave out completely. He collapsed to his knees on the cold concrete, tears streaming down his face. I'll sign, he sobbed. I'll sign everything. Please, just let me go. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. I swear. I swear. Dominic looked down at him, this pathetic, broken creature who had tormented a child for 2 years. He felt no pity, no mercy, only cold, absolute certainty. Get him a pen, he said to Marcus, and book him a one-way flight to Mexico, tonight. He turned and walked toward the door. Behind him, Victor Mercer wept on his knees, signing away every claim he had ever had to the little girl who had escaped his darkness. Justice, Dominic thought, came in many forms. Tonight, it wore a black overcoat. The documents were spread across a metal table in the corner of the warehouse. Dominic's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Harrison, who had handled the Blackwood family's special arrangements for 30 years, stood with a pen in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. His face betrayed nothing. He had witnessed worse things in this warehouse. He would witness worse things again. Victor Mercer sat in a metal chair, his hands still trembling as he signed. Page after page after page. Full relinquishment of all parental rights and guardianship claims over Emma Rose Carter. A written confession of foster care fraud, 3 years, $28,000 stolen from a child who never saw a penny, an admission of attempted kidnapping, complete with the text message evidence attached as an exhibit. Every signature was witnessed, every document notarized, every word legally binding. This confession, Harrison explained in his dry, clinical voice, will be held in a secure location. As long as you comply with the terms of your agreement, it will never see the light of day. However, should you violate any condition, I understand. Victor whispered. His voice was hollow, defeated, the voice of a man who had gambled everything and lost. He signed the last page. Harrison gathered the documents, slid them into a leather briefcase, and nodded to Dominic. It's done. They drove Victor to O'Hare International Airport in the back of a black SUV. He sat between two of Dominic's men, silent, staring at nothing. The fight had gone out of him completely. He looked smaller, somehow shrunken, diminished, like a balloon slowly leaking air. At the departure terminal, Marcus handed him an envelope. One-way ticket to Mexico City. Flight leaves in 2 hours. There's $500 cash inside, enough to get you started somewhere far away. Victor took the envelope with numb fingers. My clothes, he mumbled. My things will be shipped to whatever address you provide. Later. Marcus's voice was flat. Right now, you get on that plane and you disappear. Victor nodded. He climbed out of the SUV on unsteady legs, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. Dominic stepped out after him. The two men stood face to face in the harsh fluorescent light of the terminal entrance. Around them, travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases and coffee cups, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding in their midst. One last thing, Dominic said quietly. Victor looked up. His eyes were red, his face pale, his whole body trembling with exhaustion and fear. If I ever hear that you've come within 100 miles of Emma, if I ever hear her name on your lips, if I ever hear that you've so much as thought about returning to Chicago, Dominic leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. I won't give you another choice. I won't offer you a plane ticket or a second chance. I'll simply make a phone call, and the Vasquez cartel will handle the rest. Victor's face went gray. Do you understand? A jerky nod, frantic, desperate. Yes, I understand. I swear you'll never see me again. Good. Dominic turned and walked back to the SUV without another word. He didn't look back. Dawn was breaking over Chicago when Dominic returned to Obsidian. The sky had turned from black to deep blue to pale gold, the first rays of sunlight painting the frozen streets in shades of honey and rose. The city was beginning to wake, delivery trucks rumbling past, early commuters hurrying to the train, the distant wail of a siren somewhere far away. Dominic felt none of it. He was exhausted, bone-deep exhausted, the kind of tired that went beyond physical, that settled into the soul, and refused to leave. But there was one more thing he needed to do. He climbed the stairs to Emma's room, opened the door softly, stepped inside. She was asleep, curled in the corner. She still couldn't bring herself to sleep in the bed, with her red coat pulled over her like a blanket and Rosie clutched against her chest. Her blonde hair was spread across the carpet, tangled and wild. Her face was peaceful in sleep, the fear and tension smoothed away by dreams. Dominic lowered himself into the chair beside her. He didn't turn on the light, didn't make a sound, just sat there in the growing dawn, watching over her the way he had done so many nights before. She was safe now. Victor was gone. The documents were signed. The monster had been defanged and exiled to a place he could never return from. It was over. Emma stirred in her sleep. Her brow furrowed. Her small fingers tightened around Rosie. Mr. Dom. The words were barely a whisper, spoken to dreams, not to him. Mr. Dom, don't go. Something cracked in Dominic's chest. That same crack that had been forming since the night he first saw her in the snow, widening, deepening, letting in light he had kept out for 20 years. He reached down and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, feather-light, the touch of a man who was learning, slowly, how to be soft again. I'm here, he whispered back. I'm not going anywhere. Emma's face relaxed, her breathing steadied, a tiny smile flickered across her lips, and Dominic sat beside her, watching the sun rise over Chicago, feeling something he hadn't felt in 2 decades. 2 months later, Chicago Family Court. The courtroom was smaller than Emma had imagined. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, rows of hard benches that reminded her of church pews. It smelled like old paper and floor polish and something vaguely institutional. Emma sat in the front row, her legs dangling off the bench because her feet didn't reach the floor. She was wearing a new dress, pale blue with white flowers, bought just for today. The first piece of clothing she had ever owned that wasn't secondhand or donated. Her hair was braided neatly, woven with small white ribbons that Aunt Sarah had spent an hour perfecting that morning. Rosie sat in her lap, sporting a tiny red bow tie that Uncle Tony had fashioned from a scrap of silk napkin. For the special occasion, he had said, adjusting it with exaggerated care. Even rabbits must look their best for court. Emma didn't fully understand what was happening today. She knew it was important. She knew everyone was nervous. Even Marcus, who never seemed nervous about anything, had checked his watch 17 times in the last hour. She knew it had something to do with her. And with Mr. Dom. And with a word she barely dared to think, let alone speak aloud. Family. The proceedings had begun weeks ago. Linda Mercer, Emma's aunt, the woman who had watched her suffer for 2 years and done nothing, had signed away her guardianship rights without protest. The documents arrived by courier, notarized and complete, accompanied by no letter, no explanation, no apology. She was too afraid of Dominic Blackwood to object, too afraid to even appear in court. Emma didn't miss her. With Linda's relinquishment and Victor's exile, Emma had officially become a ward of the state, a child without parents, without guardians, without anyone legally responsible for her existence. An orphan. The word should have felt heavy, should have felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like a door opening, because Dominic Blackwood had filed for adoption the same day. The process was complicated. Dominic had no spouse, no history of raising children, no traditional family structure that the court could point to as evidence of suitability. On paper, he was a wealthy restaurant owner with vague business interests, and a reputation that made social workers nervous. But paper didn't tell the whole story. Dr. Helen Park submitted a 12-page report documenting Emma's transformation, her weight gain, her healing injuries, her psychological progress, her growing trust in the adults around her. She wrote about a child who had arrived broken and starving and afraid, and who was now laughing in kitchens and drawing pictures and sleeping through the night without screaming. Sarah Mitchell provided testimony about Emma's daily life. Her education, tutors had been hired. Her social development, she had friends now. Among the staff, her emotional stability, improving every day. Antonio Rossi wept openly on the witness stand while describing the first time Emma called him Uncle Tony. And then there were the things that didn't appear in any official record. The generous donations to the court's Children's Welfare Fund, The quiet conversations between Dominic's lawyers and the right people. The way obstacles seemed to dissolve before they could fully form. Money and power couldn't buy a child, but they could certainly smooth the path. The judge was an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen too many broken families pass through her courtroom. She reviewed the final documents, made notes, consulted with the court-appointed child advocate. Then she looked at Emma. "Emma," she said gently, "do you understand what's happening today?" Emma nodded slowly. Her fingers tightened around Rosie. "Can you tell me, in your own words, what you want?" The courtroom went silent. Emma looked at the judge, then at Aunt Sarah, who was crying quietly in the second row. Then at Uncle Tony, who was dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. Then at Marcus, who stood by the door with his arms crossed, his face suspiciously bright. Finally, she looked at Dominic. He sat beside her, tall and still, his gray eyes soft in a way that only she ever saw. He didn't prompt her, didn't coach her, just waited, the way he always waited, for her to find her own words. Emma took a deep breath. "I want to stay with Mr. Dom," she said quietly. "He makes me feel safe. He never hurts me. He sits with me when I have nightmares, and he doesn't get mad when I'm scared." Her voice grew stronger. "He's not like the other grown-ups. He keeps his promises. He said I could stay forever, and I want to, please." She looked down at Rosie, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've never had a forever before." The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, warm, genuine. The smile of someone who had finally seen something good after too many years of tragedy. "It is the ruling of this court," she said, her voice carrying through the silent room, "that the petition for adoption is granted." She looked at Emma. "Emma Carter. From this day forward, your full legal name is Emma Rose Blackwood. Mr. Dominic Blackwood is hereby recognized as your father, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." Father. The word hung in the air like sunlight. Emma turned to Dominic, her blue eyes huge, her voice trembling. I have a real dad?" Dominic slid off the bench and knelt in front of her, the same way he had knelt in the snow, the same way he had knelt during her nightmares, the same way he always came down to her level. "You have a real dad?" he said softly. "Forever? No matter what?" Emma's face crumpled. And for the first time since the day her father died, for the first time in 2 years of beatings and darkness and despair, she cried. Not tears of fear, not tears of pain, tears of joy. She threw herself into Dominic's arms and sobbed against his chest, her small body shaking with the force of an emotion she had forgotten she could feel. Dominic held her tight, and in the gallery, surrounded by people who had become family, everyone cried with her. They returned to Obsidian at sunset. The restaurant had been transformed. Streamers hung from the chandeliers, balloons clustered in every corner. A massive banner stretched across the main dining room, hand-painted in bright colors. "Welcome home, Emma Blackwood." The entire staff was there. Waiters, cooks, dishwashers, everyone. They cheered when Emma walked through the door, applauding and whistling and calling her name. Uncle Tony emerged from the kitchen carrying an enormous cake shaped like a rabbit, with white frosting and chocolate eyes and ears made of sugar cookies. "For my favorite little taste tester," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the family, Emma Blackwood." Emma laughed, a real laugh, bright and free and full of wonder. She looked around at all these people, her family, and felt something settle into place inside her chest. A piece she hadn't known was missing, a home she had never dared to dream of. She squeezed Dominic's hand and smiled up at him. "Thank you, Dad." The word was new on her tongue, strange, wonderful. Dominic's eyes glistened. "Welcome home, Emma." If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our new stories. Please like this video and share it with the people you love. Let the message of hope, resilience, and the power of family reach even more hearts around the world. We would truly love to hear from you. What did you feel while watching this story? Was there a moment that made you cry? A moment that made you smile? A moment that reminded you of something from your own life? Have you ever met someone who gave you a chance when no one else would? Have you ever been that person for someone else? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts with us. Every comment you leave is a powerful encouragement for us to keep creating meaningful stories every single day. We read every single one. We treasure every single one. Thank you for spending your precious time with us today. Take care of yourselves and the people you love. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in our next video.